Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jennifer Barbosa. I am the Youth Services Coordinator for Women's Shelter of Long Beach. Before we go ahead and get started with today's topic that we have prepared for you all, I would like to share briefly in regards to the services that Women's Shelter has available. Women's Shelter of Long Beach has been providing services for over 40 years. All services are provided at no cost to anyone who has experienced domestic violence. This includes women, men, children who may have grown up in a home and witnessed domestic violence. We also have emergency housing supportive services for anyone who has experienced domestic violence and is in need of fleeing a dangerous situation and may need support. Now, before we go ahead and continue, I would like to remind everyone that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So being a very important month, we didn't just want to focus on building healthy relationship and having a conversation of unhealthy behaviors, but we also wanted to talk about sexual assault. As we are aware, when it comes to intimate partner violence, that is something that intersects with sexual assault. Now, before we go ahead and get started, I would like to give everyone a trigger warning. A trigger warning is any normal reactions to any abnormal events. A lot of the material can be a little sensitive for some of us, so such reactions can come up, such as maybe headache, maybe back pain, stomach ache. Maybe you might start feeling fear out of nowhere, anger, sadness. So if at any time you may be experiencing any reactions, know that it's okay to take care of yourself. If you may need to pause, take a break, and later on come back to continue the material, you're definitely welcome to do so. Now, one of the things that we are aware when we're talking about intimate partner violence is that when there's violence within a relationship, it progresses into what is called the cycle of violence. Now, the cycle of violence entails of three phases. It has the honeymoon phase, the tension building phase, and the violence and explosion phase. And this is an ongoing cycle that keeps going around, around, and around. Now, one of the things that's very important is at the center of the cycle, but we'll go ahead and talk a little bit more as we continue with today's presentation. Now, let's go ahead and start breaking these different phases down. Let's first start off with the honeymoon phase. Now, just hearing the word honeymoon, you might think of it being a time where everything's lovey-dovey, everything's great, everything's just wonderful during the relationship, where it's a time of bliss, where maybe there's promises to change, there's gifts that are being bought, that extra kindness, affection that's possibly happening during the relationship, the promises that the violence will not happen again. And it's with the intention to persuade the partner to forgive them or stay longer in the relationship. But eventually, this phase will disappear as time passes by. It will then transition into the next phase, which is the tension building phase. So when we think of the word tension building phase, we might possibly think of it being a time where it's possibly stressful or overwhelming, where it's marked by jealousy, that isolation, that control, that minor emotional, physical violence that might start happening during the relationship, where that minor emotional might be put down, might be a few insults, where that physical abuse might be a small shove. Oftentimes, victims or survivors have shared that when they find themselves in the second phase, they feel like they're walking on eggshells, meaning that they feel like they have to be very cautious or careful in fear of what kind of reaction might come out of the person that's causing the harm. And this is one of the phases that can last for a few hours, months, or anything in between. This is one of the longest lasting phases. Eventually, it'll transition into the last phase, which is the violence and explosion phase. This is one of the shortest phase, which is particularly marked by a bad blow up, where that verbal or physical abuse starts happening more frequently, starts getting more intense, where if before there was some minor emotional abuse, that verbal violence starts getting more intense, where there's put downs, eventually put someone's self-esteem, insults over and over. That physical violence, where before it was a small shove and now has become more intense, where a slap or a punch. One of the things that we also want to share is that the explosion is not just limited to the physical violence that might happen, but it can also be emotional, mental, verbal, digital, or sexual abuse that can be happening during that phase as well. Now, how does the cycle work? One of the things that we are aware is that once the explosion phase and violence phase kind of fades away for a bit, it'll later on transition back into the honeymoon phase. And the way it transitions back into the honeymoon phase is due to that apologies, the promises that things are going to be different, that things will change or be better. But eventually, one of these faces will disappear as time passes by. And the face that will eventually disappear due to that promises and making up and the violence escalating, it's the honeymoon phase. And the reason the honeymoon phase disappears over time is due to what's at the core of the cycle, which is the power and control. If one person has all that power and control over the other, they're pretty much the ones that have all the control, are the ones that make the decisions, the ones that have created the fear within the victim, with threats, with that constant violence that's happening over and over and over again. One of the things that we would like to mention as well is that breaking the cycle can be very, very difficult. It can take an average of at least 7 times until someone is ready to take those steps and leave the relationship for good. But one of the things that we also want to remind others is that ending the relationship oftentimes puts the victim and survivor at high risk for more extreme levels of violence due to the person that's causing the harm losing that power and control over the victim, where they feel the need to take the violence to a more extreme level to continue having that power and control. And one of the things that we recommend and we want to remind survivors is that there is support to be able to guide them and possibly create a safety plan to get the necessary support and eventually leave the relationship whenever they feel ready to do so. So what is intimate partner violence? So intimate partner violence is the repeated physical, verbal, emotional, mental, and sexual abuse that occurs in an abusive dating relationship. So a red flag should always be this. Let's say, for example, that we possibly know of a couple who has been dating for quite some time, and maybe that certain friend comes up to you and shares, hey, you know what, I've been dating this person, but I feel very afraid of my partner. Like, they really, really scare me. That should always be a red flag to you and let you know that there's a possible power and control imbalance and that the relationship is possibly not the healthiest. Another thing is that abuse can happen with individuals who may be just going out, dating, living together, engaged, married, or even broken up or divorced. Another thing that I want to remind everyone also is that unfortunately, when we're talking about intimate partner violence or sexual assault, this is something that can happen to anyone regardless of their gender identity, sexual orientation, cultural background, or socioeconomic status. Now let's go ahead and start breaking down the different forms of abuse. So the first type of abuse we have up here is physical abuse. That can include from pushing, shoving, pinching, scratching, hitting, kicking, slapping, and the last one I have up there is hickeys. So when we're talking about physical abuse, it's any kind of physical interaction that's causing harm to another person. Now, when we're talking about hickeys, oftentimes that's a question that comes up where some people might ask, why is a hickey a form of physical abuse? So the example we like to share with you all today is, let's say, for example, we know these two farmers. These two farmers have cows in their farm, but they have no fence to differentiate their cows. As farmers, what do farmers do to their cows? They grab a hot burning steel and they go ahead and mark their cow with either initial or a symbol. I know in some cases, even tags are being used to mark cows as well. But once a farmer is marking their cow, what are they saying about that cow? That cow is their property. So kind of like that example, hickeys can be used in that way where somebody can try to mark their partner up and pretty much state to others that that person belongs to them, that that's their property, when in reality, we're no one's property but our own. Another thing I would like to mention is, because I don't want you all thinking that because somebody has a hickey that they might be in an abusive relationship. That's not always the case. There's definitely a difference. If somebody gave that consent or that permission, where there's that mutual agreement amongst individuals that whatever certain physical activity was okay and given that permission, then that definitely is different. But we'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about that as we continue. Now let's go ahead and go into the next type of abuse, which is verbal abuse, which includes name calling, yelling, screaming, insults, swearing, and sarcasm. Now, when we're talking about, as we're talking about sarcasm, sarcasm is when we possibly say something but we mean the opposite. So we have possibly been sarcastic at one point in our lives, if it's been with family, friends, but of course it's in a way where we're joking around, playing around, and there's that mutual agreement that it's okay. But of course, what's different when it comes to relationships that are unhealthy is when that sarcasm is being utilized in a way where the intentions are to harm others. Where, let's say, for example, that we have a couple who've been dating, they decide to get ready to go for dinner, go to a party. One of the partners gets ready, asks their partner if they look good in whatever they're wearing. Their partner looks at them, rolls their eye, and says, "Yeah, you look pretty," using that tone of voice. Now, if that partner is stating that, yeah, they look okay with whatever they're wearing, do you think that that other partner will feel like their self-esteem is boosted up because of the tone of voice they used, and because their partner rolled their eyes? They might feel really put down. It might even feel like they might have to go ahead and change because of that reaction that came out of their partner. Now let's go on to the next phase, to the next type of abuse, which is emotional abuse, which includes constant criticizing, threatening, public humiliation, controlling behavior, and jealousy. Now, when it comes to jealousy, one of the things that I would like to remind everyone is that when it comes to jealousy, is a normal emotion to have, just like how you have possibly felt happy, excited, nervous, scared. All these other feelings are normal for us to feel. So just like those feelings, jealousy is okay to have, and it's okay to feel that. It just depends how it's being utilized that makes it either healthy or unhealthy. If we're using jealousy in a way where we're having that controlling behavior, we're making every single choice for our partner, not allowing them to have a voice, then that definitely is not the healthiest. One of the things that we can possibly do is if maybe jealousy is coming on, is maybe taking a pause, walking taking some deep breath, maybe talking about it, if not with your partner, possibly calling a friend and communicating, and later on checking in with your partner about why those feelings might have come up and using those I statements. Now, let's go into mental abuse, which is destroying things that belong to you, not letting you have friends, punching walls, stalking, and not letting you leave, or even ending the relationship. Now, when it comes to destroying things that belong to you, that can be from maybe a very meaningful possession that you might have to important documents such as identification, birth certificate, social security, any documents that are very important, where they might destroy that information in order to continue maintaining that power and control over the person to the extreme where they might not allow the person to leave or even end the relationship. Next is digital abuse, which includes blackmail, harassing messages, bullying, cyberbullying, demanding your password in social and status updates, demanding to check your phone, and creating those fake accounts, or catfishing, which catfishing is when somebody creates a fake profile pretending to be somebody that they're not. And a lot of times we've heard stories of individuals who have been in these relationships and have shared that their partners will create these fake accounts just to keep track of every single thing that that person did. If it was who they were talking to, maybe tracking their location, seeing who they spoke with, anything like that. And again, to continue maintaining that power and control. Now, when it comes to demanding your password, if someone's in a relationship and their partner is demanding their password to keep a track who they're talking to look through their phone, that definitely is a huge red flag, as it's letting them know that there's possibly no trust in that relationship. And if there's no trust in that relationship, then that's not really healthy to have. Next is sexual abuse, which includes sexual advances after being told no, unwanted or uncomfortable touching, calling someone sexually derogatory names, and rape. Now, let's go ahead and break this down. Now, before we go ahead and continue, I would like to give another trigger warning. The following slides will include graphic language and images regarding sexual abuse, violence, and sexual assault. And again, know that it's okay to take a pause and later on come back to continue the material if at any time you do feel triggered. Now, what is the difference between sexual abuse, sexual violence, and sexual assault? So when it comes to sexual violence, it's often used more as an umbrella term that includes a wide range of sexual acts. It can include from sexual assault, rape, sexual harassment, unwanted touching, sexual coercion, sex trafficking, female genital cutting, child sexual abuse, child marriage, enforced sterilization, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, and forced pregnancy. So oftentimes we may hear of the term sexual violence being used, but again, it's more of that umbrella term to describe a different range of sexual acts. Now, when we're talking about sexual abuse, this is commonly used when talking about sexual assault of children and youth. However, Women's Shelter of Long Beach and those in the domestic violence field typically use sexual abuse to refer to abuse occurring within an intimate partner relationship, a relationship that's amongst adults and youth. Now, what is sexual assault? So one of the things that I would like to just discuss a bit is that when we're talking about sexual assault, unfortunately, this is something that has been ongoing for so many years. If we go back in time into history, back into 200 BC, unfortunately, this is something that was very acceptable, where a woman, if she was sexually assaulted, at times she was forced to being married to the person that assaulted her. Another thing is that if women back in those times were assaulted, instead of being instead of criminalizing the person that harmed them, the one that would be criminalized would be the woman who was harmed, which is very unfortunate, that this was happening back so many years. And I know as years continue passing by, this is something that has been worked to create laws and make those protections and continue having these conversations for individuals who have experienced this type of trauma. Now, what is sexual assault? So sexual assault refers to a continuum of behaviors that includes rape, but also encompasses any unwanted physical contact of a sexual nature. On this continuum, everything from non-consensual kissing and fondling to forced oral, anal, or vaginal sex is an act of sexual assault. So every 2 minutes, someone in the US is sexually assaulted. Every 2 minutes. Now, how is rape defined in California? So rape is defined as an act of sexual intercourse accomplished with a person when the act is accomplished against a person's will by means of force, violence, duress, menace, or fear of immediate bodily injury on the person or another. So in 2012, the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program defined rape as penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. So just to share a little bit of some statistics, 50 to 70% of battered women report being sexually assaulted by their partner. And like I mentioned before, unfortunately, when it comes to intimate partner violence and sexual assault, this is an intersection between the two where individuals have experienced some form of sexual assault by their partner, being they're just dating or married. 69 to 83% of women who have been sexually assaulted by their partners acknowledge multiple incidents. 18% of marital rape survivors report that rape occurred in front of their children. 5% of marital rape survivors report that the perpetrator also forced sex on their children. And one of the things that I want to mention when it comes to marital rape, unfortunately, due to certain cultures that some may grow up in, oftentimes there's that idea that it's normal behavior and that it's not considered sexual assault, when in reality, even if someone is married or has been in a relationship for so many years, when there's not consent, that there's no permission, it is considered rape and sexual assault. So as we continue having this conversation and sharing this information, like I mentioned, oftentimes there is this culture that we possibly might have grown up in, have watched, have heard, which takes us into rape culture. Rape culture is a culture in which rape and sexual violence are common, in which prevalent attitudes, norms, and practices in the media condone, normalize, excuse, or encourage sexualized violence. And this is something that we have possibly seen in movies, in TV shows, certain advertisements that are posted, if it's on commercials on TV, where certain sexual violence acts are seen as a comedy or something that's normal and it's good behavior, when in reality, if we really focus and kind of look into the behavior, it's definitely not healthy behavior, and it's not okay for anyone to repeat any of those behaviors. So this video, I unfortunately won't get to show this video on here. As I mentioned, unfortunately, I will not be able to show this video, but it's definitely a video I do recommend for each of you who's watching to check out the video. I will be providing a resource sheet with the link as well, so you can be able to check it out. But this is a TED Talk by Tony Porter called A Call to Men, which he discusses a culture in which boys or men have been put into this, what is called a man box, where there are certain expectations of men and boys to act a certain way, especially not showing emotion, being aggressive, seeing women as sexual objects. And he really just breaks that down, but also giving more of an understanding where we can change that culture, because not every man or boys that we have possibly in our lives are that aggressive or abusive person. There's definitely very kind, intelligent, um, men who are definitely able to show emotion and know that it's okay to show emotion. We can be able to change that culture. So I definitely recommend for all of you to check it out when you get an opportunity. It's a really, really awesome TED Talk to check out, and just to continue discussing in regards to that rape culture, which is something that's ongoing, not just on advertisements, but certain expectation when it comes not just to men, but also women as well. Now, to continue with rape culture, unfortunately, like I mentioned before, this is something that we oftentimes see in advertisements. If it's advertisements that we see in magazines, if it's advertisements that we might see in commercials and billboards, magazines. Here on this slide, I have two advertisements that were on a magazine. The first one that we see, it's a young man. It seems like he's grabbing or touching this young woman in a way that obviously it seems that she is not comfortable with. But the message or the words that are on this advertisement um, say, unlike some people, Belvedere always goes down smoothly. Now, this is an advertisement for vodka, which is an alcoholic beverage. Which again, what kind of message is it sending in regards to the consent, or possibly giving the message that it's okay to act upon this way? The next one we have in the same slide is we see a woman with three men kind of hovering over her. It seems like one of them is kind of pulling her hair. The other one very aggressive over her. But again, if we look into the advertisement, what is it selling? What are they selling? If we're looking here, and again, this is a advertisement for Calvin Klein jeans. So again, questioning, where are the jeans? What are they advertising? Because right here, it definitely seems like this young woman is being assaulted by multiple individuals in this picture. Now, the next slide is we see a young man in a suit holding a necklace. We see a woman sitting on the couch in a dress, but if you look really closely, she has a black eye. And what it says on the advertisement, it says, look good in all you do. And again, if we're really looking at the whole picture, what kind of message is it bringing out, or is it's sharing by this advertising, that it's okay and it's normal to act upon violence, and then possibly gift after that explosion phase occurred. So again, just being aware of these messages that at times advertisements tend to bring out, and questioning, what is it really selling? Are they selling a certain perfume, that jean, if it's Calvin Klein, or that shirt? But really focusing on what it's really um, selling, and also the message that it's promoting. um, Now let's go on. So some more statistics I wanted to share is 84% of sexual violence involved an offender who was a family member, intimate partner, friends, or acquaintance. So oftentimes there's that myth that people believe that when there's any sexual assault, that it's usually happening by someone that's a stranger, someone that that comes out from behind the bushes, when unfortunately that's not the case. Oftentimes the person who has sexually assaulted that individual is usually somebody that they personally know, if it's a family member, friend, acquaintance, or intimate partner. 55% of sexual assault occurs at or near the victim's home. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will be sexually assaulted, abused in their lifetime. And like I mentioned before, just like intimate partner violence, when it comes to sexual assault, this is something that does not discriminate and can happen to women, men, and anyone in the LGBTQ population as well. 64% of transgender people have experienced sexual assault in their lifetime, and 26% of rapes are ever reported. And the reason for that is a lot of times survivors who have experienced some sort of sexual assault may be afraid of reporting or sharing their experience due to feeling afraid of what kind of reaction might come out. So now, as I mentioned before, when we're talking about consent, consent is that permission, that mutual agreement amongst two individuals that whatever activity is okay eh, between the two. And one of the things that I wanted to share is this really neat consent from Planned Parenthood that breaks down a little bit more of what consent is by using the word fries, by breaking it down as F, freely given, R, reversible, I, informed, E, enthusiastic, and S, specific. So one of the things that we know is that consent is permission, but it always has to be informed and freely given, never with the act of pressuring or forcing somebody into doing anything that they do not feel comfortable doing, where there's that mutual understanding with words and actions, allowing the person to have a voice, and again, not pressuring. And if there's maybe a certain activity happening, and the person may not feel very comfortable, it's okay to check in with your partner and see if they are still okay with the physical activity or situation that is happening at that time. And one of the things as well is being aware of somebody's body language, because that can tell you a lot, as well as their face expression. They can give you a lot of information, even to where that person might not feel comfortable. And again, if you didn't agree to it, it was assault. Now, this next video is called T for Consent. This is a really great video. I recommend for you all to check it out, but it pretty much uses the analogy of tea to explain a little bit more of what consent is, and to have more of that understanding. Now, in this next scenario, so talking a little bit more about consent, Kim and Lee just wanted to, this is a couple who have been dating for quite some time, but I wanted to go ahead and take this opportunity to read the scenario. And what I would love for you all to do is to take on your own time, be able to take some notes and see if you define this as consensual. So Kim and Lee have been dating for a semester. They were hooking up in Lee's room one afternoon after class. Kim felt like things were going too fast. Lee tells Kim, I thought you really liked me, and I thought this could be a special time. Kim really likes Lee, but doesn't want to move too quickly. Lee begins to question whether or not Kim trusts him. He also says things like, we've been going out for a semester, and it's time you made me happy. He continues to say things like, I've been waiting for such a long time. You're lucky I'm still with you. He also says, come on, Kim, it will be special. After some time, Kim feels pressured and gives in to his request. So what just happened? Would any of you define this as consensual? So what we hear and kind of read off is Kim and Lee are in this relationship. They've been dating, it sounds, for some time now. It's been a semester. Of course, Kim feels like things are going too fast. Lee seems to kind of be pressuring Kim into doing certain acts. uh, that she's possibly not ready for yet, especially saying Kim really likes Lee, but doesn't want to move too quickly. So it sounds like she wants to take it slow, right? But of course, if we see Lee's responses, it seems like he's pressuring her or coercing her into doing certain activities that she's just not ready for. So saying things like, we've been going out for a semester and this time you made me happy, or I've been waiting for a long time, you're lucky I'm still with you. And of course, as we see, things that Lee says to Kim eventually pressures her into giving into his request. And of course, with little things that kind of come out within this relationship, we can see that there's not that consent in place. If maybe Kim possibly said, yeah, I guess it's okay. Again, that's not giving that full consent or that permission that Kim really feels comfortable with everything that's going on within the relationship. It sounds like Kim feels pressured into giving into Lee's request. And a lot of times when we're talking about individuals who have experienced intimate partner violence and sexual assault, oftentimes they feel blamed for the harm that happened to them, which is victim blaming, which usually occurs when a victim of any type of crime is held entirely responsible for the harm that happened to them. And this can happen or has happened a lot with survivors of intimate partner violence, where such questions are brought up as, well, why didn't they leave? They must like to be abused. That's why they stayed in that relationship for so long. But in reality, do we really think that someone who is in a abusive relationship, that they like to be mistreated? Definitely not. Now, if we're talking about survivors of sexual assault, unfortunately, this is something that we've seen in the media and the news. But certain questions come up as, well, what was she wearing? Why was that person out so late? Why were they hanging out with those people? And again, if we listen to those questions, we hear that that person is being blamed for the harm that happened to them, instead of asking questions that focus more on the individual that caused the harm. So again, we can definitely change that culture and be aware of what questions we're asking, and asking the questions of why did that person cause the harm to that other individual. So what can you do if you know someone who has been sexually assaulted? One of the things that we mentioned as we previously talked about victim blaming, a lot of times survivors of intimate partner violence or sexual assault will feel shame and blame for all the harm that happened to them. So if somebody ever comes to you disclosing any information on the assault that they have experienced, make sure that you reassure them, that you believe them, and that you do not judge them, that you know that it's not their fault, that you're thankful that they told you. A lot of times it can be very difficult for some to share their experience, that you're sorry that that happened to them and that they are not alone, that you care about them and are there to listen and help in any way that you can. We can also remind them that it's important for them to get help whenever they're ready. Not talking about the assault will not make it go away. It's important for survivors to process feelings and to develop healthy coping skills. The sooner survivors get support for themselves, the sooner they will regain a sense of control over their lives. But one of the things that I want to remind people is that a lot of times we may provide this information to individuals who have experienced sexual assault, but just be aware that that person might not just be ready to get take that support just yet. And we can be patient and just remind them that there's help for them whenever they feel ready to talk about their experience. And also just to share, YWCA does provide services at no cost to anyone who has experienced sexual assault. They have advocacy counseling, crisis intervention, and a 24-hour hotline for anyone who is seeking support. Now, as we talked about intimate partner violence and sexual assault, one of the things that I would love to remind everyone is that we have the right to not be physically, emotionally, and sexually abused, that you are to be treated with respect, to say no and be heard, that you have the right to express your own opinions. You have the right to have your own opinions, as different as your partners, and that's okay. To be able to express your own opinions, to have private time in your own space, to have friends of your own, to hear about your strengths and assets, to ask for help when you need it, to live a violence-free life, and to change your mind, fall out of love, and live with no threats, to accept a gift without having to give anything in return, to pursue your own special interests and not be criticized for pursuing them, and to have your needs considered as much as your partner's. Now, in this next slide, you will see a couple resources that we have added of where to get help, including our agency. We also do have a 24-hour crisis hotline for anyone who is seeking support or other resources. There's also the LGBTQ Center of Long Beach, who provides supports for youth, but also for any individual who has experienced intimate partner violence. There's the Legal Aid Foundation, Break the Cycle, Love is Respect, National DV Hotline, the RAIN Hotline, and of course, Why the VCA, and a couple other resources that I have included on this slide. Thank you so much for hearing today's information and for being open to uh, hearing a little bit more of information of intimate partner violence as well as sexual assault. If you have any further questions, you are all welcome to contact me at jbarbosa@womenshelterlb.org. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.